So
Okay.
thank you, Marylin, to be here with Canal Energia. We often talk about energy poverty, considering only the economic side, but this phenomenon has a high social price too. Old people, young unemployed, underaged are the victim of the scourge. How En.act would dare to fight the energy poverty?
Yeah, so I thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about both energy poverty in general and En.act and our role in trying to fight energy poverty. So you're absolutely right. The economic cost of energy poverty is very real for people in it. It means that they have to make choices like, do I pay my electricity bill and my gas bill, or do I buy food to put on the table and feed my children? So there's a very economic cost at that level, but the social costs for those people are often huge. And it often is, if you're chronically cold at home, that has definite health impacts. For young children and adults, it means they get more colds and more flus, and then that turns into more days of missed going to school or missed going to work. And so there's long-term effects from that. If children miss too many days of school, then they don't do well at school, and then it's more difficult for them year after year after year to do well at school, and then eventually to get into a good career. But I think the other thing that's important to think about is the health impacts for older people who stay at home many more hours in a day. Typically, most people are not at home all the time. This year, of course, is the exception. But elderly people who are cold at home all the time end up with these very serious chronic conditions related to respiratory problems and heart people. The health conditions can be more related to serious respiratory problems and to heart conditions. And in extreme cases, that can lead to an early death for those people. If they have a serious heart attack, then that's, and these are what is counted in statistics as excess winter deaths. So it's the idea that somebody died early because they were living in energy poverty and because of the cold impacts on them. So those kinds of social impacts and health and social impacts actually add up to quite a heavy cost for countries. And particularly if you look at the risks that people face at home that ultimately have a cost for the national health system. It's things like if you fall down the stairs, or if you get burnt in your house, or if you have mold and things, then you go and you need medical services, or you end up going to the hospital. And so there's a healthcare cost based on the risks in your home. But a study from the UK showed that being chronically cold at home has much, much higher healthcare costs. If it does lead to a respiratory problem or a heart attack in an elderly person, that can be a one-time cost to the health system of up to 20,000 euros by the time you count somebody being in the hospital for several days of care for a serious heart attack. So we often think about the economic cost to people of energy poverty, but when you add up all of those people in a country, if it's 10 or 15 or 20% of people in a country that are in energy poverty and needing those healthcare services, it becomes a very heavy healthcare cost for the country.
And how En.act could help these people? I was wondering that we are not only working for a subsidy. I think that we need to do something that could change forever this way to live.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very much a multimedia reporting outlet. And so sometimes it feels like there's other organizations that are doing things that are much more direct to help people in energy poverty. But where we see our role is, it's reflected in our tagline, which is reporting that seeks to empower. And so we do several things to empower different people that are involved in energy poverty. For people who are living in energy poverty, one of the things we do is a whole social media campaign with energy saving tips. How can you reduce your energy consumption at home and thereby reduce your energy bills a little bit? And it's very simple things like, choosing to use cold water when you're doing your laundry, or reducing the number of hours that you have your heat on, but doing that strategically, because it's important that you don't become cold, but maybe you don't need to keep your heat on all the time. So we have this whole set of tips that we do on social media, and those are now being videoed by an organization in the UK, and that project is linked to a European-based project. So those tips that are being videotaped will eventually be translated into 7 different languages and distributed across 7 or 8 different countries. So, we're a very small organization, but by doing this first research and getting those tips ready, we see that we're going to be able to impact people across Europe. And then the second way that En.act is empowering people is we're very much following who is doing what to address energy poverty. So we report on what social organizations are doing, what policymakers are doing, what organizations like the Renovate Europe campaign are doing. And we do that in a way that our reporting is very straightforward and very simple. So we will have like a 300-word article that explains the 5 basic points of a new policy or a new technology. But we recognize that that's really important, so people in energy poverty and the general public understands that somebody is doing something about this. A second level is we do a second version of each of our articles that is much more geared towards the actor sector. So we're helping to explain why this technology works or why this policy works, and we've got the research to back it up. We're not doing the research, but we're digging into the research that has been done. And so our second layer of content is very much geared towards making the connections across different groups of actors who are involved in this. And we recently did a survey of our followers, and about 40% of the people that responded said that our content had encouraged them to reach out to make a professional connection with somebody they hadn't known before. And we see that in academics are reaching out to the technology people, and the technology people are reaching out to the policy people. And so for us, that's a really, really important part of the empowering through reporting, is to say, look, all this great stuff is going on, but because you work in this sector and you work in that sector, you're kind of following your own things, and we're making that content available much more broadly as I said, in a very straightforward way. So you don't have to understand the technology if you're academic. You'll get the basic idea of it.
About the new technology, do you think that they could help people in energy poverty as more efficiency or IoT? And in case, are you thinking to share some technology? Are you working with some enterprise to do that?
Yeah, so I think one of the really interesting things about the energy poverty challenge is the technology question is not so difficult. We know how to make buildings and homes more efficient. We know that, the first thing you need to do is put insulation in, then you need to fix your windows and doors, put in a more efficient heating system or cooling system, because energy poverty is a problem in the summer as well. So the technology, there's new technologies that are coming onto the market that are ever more and more efficient, but the technology challenge is not the overarching barrier to addressing energy poverty. What it really is those technologies tend to be more expensive than people in energy poverty can afford. And many people in energy poverty have homes that are either they're renting a home, or if they own a home, its value is quite low and their income is low. And so they have difficulty saving money to purchase a new boiler or to purchase insulation. And they have difficulty accessing financing, even though there's, in many countries now, there's state subsidies to support that kind of, putting insulation into low-income homes. It's very difficult for the people to get approval for that kind of financing and funding. And also it's difficult for them to access the whole government system that is delivering those services. So I think really the challenge is how to institute policies and financing programs that support the deployment of the technologies that we know exist. And so it's more about how to get those technologies out into homes than it is about needing new technologies.
When we talk about have some rules. the rule could be a Europe model, probably.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's really interesting and important is the way the European Green Deal is aiming for Europe to be carbon neutral by 2050. And within the European Green Deal is the idea of a renovation wave, which recognizes that without making buildings more efficient, we will never reach the goals of the European Green Deal. Buildings account for about 40% of all EU energy demand and 36% of EU emissions. So unless you fix all buildings, you're never going to get to carbon neutrality. But I think there's also a challenge in there in that there's quite a lot of funding within the European Green Deal for this renovation wave, but a lot of that is large amounts of funding that can support big projects, and it's very, very difficult to get that funding to one household that needs 20,000 euros to put in insulation and fix up the boiler and things like that. So this is a really important part of what actually the EU has now put together in terms of its national recovery and resilience plan in response to the COVID crisis. Is there's a large amount of money now available for governments to roll out recovery plans, and there's definitely money for renovation in those plans. So this is a real opportunity for governments to say to the EU, we are going to dedicate X amount of this recovery money to getting homes renovated.
So the start for we can start from to design all these rules, probably thinking about the right of the energy. Is energy a right, and how we can have a target of it? Because of course we can use energy for a lot of things. I think that it's not easy to decide who is where is the right and where is the option.
Absolutely. So officially in the European social pillar, energy is recognized as a right in terms of the right to the things that allow people to live with dignity and have access to or be able to participate in society. But that concept, the right to energy, is really quite vague, and it's very broad. And so there's many different academics who have talked about it and tried to figure out, well, what does that really look like? What does it mean? And most recently, I did a very interesting podcast with a gentleman from Taiwan, Dr. Shenwei Xu, who has really sat down and thought about this from the policymaker's perspective and said, you can't just say, well, I'm going to give the right to energy, because how do you put that into law? It's far too broad, it's far too difficult. And so he's really broken it down into 8 different elements. And the very first one is the right to access energy. So everyone should be able to access energy that's of a decent quality and have reliable energy and have enough energy to support their needs. But then the second part of it is the right to access energy services. And that is different than just accessing energy, because I kind of think of it like a battery. A battery has energy in it, but unless you have a device that can extract that energy, there's no value to it. So you can say, well, I have electricity, but if I'm not getting a service, so the services you would use electricity for are lighting and heating and operating your electronics and those kinds of things. So you need to be able to access energy services as well. And then he goes on and he talks about things like the right to afford energy and the right to participate in energy policy making and the right to, if your energy bill is not transparent or if you have charges that you don't agree with, you have the right to try to negotiate that or to refuse the payment of that. So in that podcast, he really walks us through kind of 8 levels of rights related to energy, the right to energy, but within each of those 8, there's 4 or 5 different elements. So in fact, he gives us about 30 or 40 different aspects that should be considered in the right to energy. And I just found it such an interesting, insightful interview. And also I felt like it would give policymakers a checklist. Do my people have the right to access energy that's affordable and reliable? And do they have the right to access energy services? And then a second podcast we did was with Marylin Smith, who is a researcher at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And she's really looking more at what precedents exist in international law to support the right to energy. And she's found some very good examples from Bolivia, also from Asia. And then there's a very, very interesting example from Bulgaria, where there was one community in Bulgaria where the electricity company was putting in electricity meters in people's homes and in districts. And in one particular district, they put the electricity meters very, very high up on electricity poles. So people couldn't actually see their electricity meters. And the electricity company made the argument that this was a neighborhood where people were prone to stealing electricity and to putting extra connections on us. So they made the argument that they needed to do this to protect their own system. And this eventually went to the European Court of Justice. And the Court of Justice found in favor of the neighborhood and said that, in fact, the electricity company had been discriminatory, because you cannot say an entire neighborhood is going to be energy thieves. You can only deal with an individual consumer who might be stealing energy. And so that was one of the most important rights cases that has come to the European Court of Justice. And it was found in favor of the citizens to say, no, I have the right to access energy and to have information about the energy that I'm accessing. So I think those kinds of precedents are super exciting. It does mean that, the next time this is happening, there's already a legal case to say, no, I'm being discriminated against and I shouldn't be. So that also feeds into the right to energy.
Last question, sorry. You talk about the project that you are going on that is called Call at Home.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would like also to remember people that there is a website, and they could also find your action on the website and to be informed about. In Italy, as Canale Energia, our journal, founded an energy poverty alliance, an Italian alliance, and we start with the consumer association.
Yeah,
we start with it. And now we try to involve more consumer association and more also utility and activity. And we found that there is not easy to inform people, but also to be informed between different projects, because sometimes there are some very good projects that are a test project, and they don't share the information, not because they don't want to share it, but probably because they don't know each other, or they don't think that could be interesting to share it. And we find it that could be really interesting also because a lot of these enterprise and association are used to think about energy poverty, but they don't try a way to be strong to fight it. I would like to know if it's also your feeling about the different projects in Europe, and if you think that we need to share more information and probably also need more to share more best practices about, because probably something could help each other also to decide the rules that we talk about in Europe, because we know that could be different between country, because different climate, different social culture, but something could be similar.
Absolutely. And this is exactly why I had the idea to launch the Energy Action Project and the Cold at Home website, is because I felt there's such a disconnect between who's doing what at different levels of society, and who's across Europe, who's doing what. And then also globally, there's very different kinds of energy poverty in the developing countries than there is in Europe. But just to stay within Europe, I think is interesting for this particular interview. And absolutely, one of the things we think is key is to find those organizations who are doing something and raise their profile. And as you said, they often don't know about each other. And so by reporting on them, we're helping them make connections with each other. The other thing that we've helped do is, particularly for some of the projects that we would call our social innovation, where it's not charity and it's not social services, it's really a business idea that can help people in energy poverty in a way that has some financial, is financially viable. It doesn't rely on grants and charity. So we're helping to report on some of those. And one of the really interesting examples actually is from Belgium. And it's a guy who works for a social agency, but he recognized within the homes that he serves where people are in energy poverty, one of the very expensive things is their appliances, particularly if they're renting. They have old appliances that are inefficient, and yet they can't afford to buy new appliances, or because they're renters, they're just not going to buy new appliances, and their landlords are not going to buy them. And so what Stefan did was partner up with Bosch, the appliance company that has very high-end, very efficient appliances, and they've created a rental scheme where for, I think it's about 12 or 15 euros a month, a household can rent an efficient fridge, stove, freezer, washer, and dryer set. And that means their electricity consumption goes down by more than 15 euros a month. So they're paying less. It also means that they're not having to do things like go to the laundromat and spend a lot of money, in putting euros into the laundromat. So they're home more. They can spend more time with their kids. And so Stefan started that as a relatively small project in Belgium. It's now going across Belgium, and there's interest in other countries to scale it up. And so to me, that's just a brilliant example of, once you find a good project and you report on it, then other people get interested in it and say, how can that work in my country, in my context? And that's really, really central to what we as a media outlet want to do. So I'm thrilled that you